What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to YGOPD, your Yu-Gi-Oh! Professional Development, and today I am excited to showcase one of my favorite decks again on the channel. This is the first time I've had the chance to run this back against the new ban list and the new format. I've had the chance to take this back to a quick OTS, a little bit smaller, went 3-0 against 2 Kashtira and a Sword Soul. Not much crazy to say, but overall it's been a really fun deck. I think this deck is insane and cooks really hard in this format. It's absolutely nuts. It's still one of my favorite decks. This is Marincess. This is still a pretty insane budget deck, but if you have the ability to pay for certain staples, this deck feels pretty much unbeatable. Of course, before we hop into it, I want to shout out all of our new public subs of the channel. Gabriel, Ethan, Chaotic, Sui, Armando, Trey, James, and Mega. Thank you all so much for joining the channel. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing. It truly does help the channel. We are on the road to 1,000. That is a big goal for me this year. As well as feel free to like and comment. All that engagement really does help the channel and help the algorithm push things along. So with all that said, we won't take too much time. We're going to showcase the main deck, the extra deck, the side deck, and we'll go ahead and hop right into it. Alright, starting off with the main deck, there are a couple tech choices and changes I will talk about in terms of ratios that should really happen, depending on if you have them laying around in your bulk or not. But either way, I will zoom in just a little bit, get things organized, and go ahead and talk through it here. Starting off, your best starter, triple blue Tang, not much needs to be said. This is your 1-card combo that ends on a spell trap negate, as well as wave going first. In line with that, we play triple Seahorse. This, along with 3 Spring Girl, are both your secondary best starters. These both end on a Link 4 by themselves, which is going to be Bubble Reef plus the trap, which is Wave. So there we go. 3 Seahorse, 3 Spring Girl. Spring Girl specials herself to the field by banishing a Marincess from your grave, and then Seahorse special summons it to a zone a Marincess monster points to. That's a regular inherent summon and not an activated effect. And then moving forward, I bumped up Pascalis to 3. I have, in a perfect world, I would be playing 1 Signet Mining. I cut that down from 3 to 1. I'm playing 2 because I am missing a Basilamius. I'll show that right here on screen, and I'll talk about it again when I get to it. But essentially, to help avoid the cash nonsense that is both a Rise Heart and Dimension Shifter, you need to have monsters that are more just names. Actually be able to summon and start your plays. You can't pay cost for Signet Mining under cards like a Rise Heart or Shifter, those kinds of things. So you just want bodies instead of that. So that's the direction I've taken it. So again, 1 Mandarin and 1 Sleepy Maiden. Pretty straightforward there again, and there should be 1 Basilamius here instead of the 1 Signet Mining, but we are on 2. If you want to play 3 Signet Mining, you can cut the Pascalis down to 1, but overall, I think having the extra names are better. So in reality, what you're really looking at is just one of the Signet Minings is a Basilamius, and then you also just play 1 Signet Mining. You still want the total number of names to be the same. You're running around 15 summonable names or a way to get a name with your Marincess package. So that's pretty straightforward there. And then the last couple pieces of the Marincess package are pretty straightforward. We are on 2 Dive, needs no explanation, and then 1 Battle Ocean and 1 Wave. Still on 1 Wave, you can definitely bump this up to 2, but I still just prefer hand traps and or board breakers that are non-conditional, meaning you can just use them instead of having to have Wave and get Wave set up. Yes, it does suck if it does get hit, but you have so many ways to recur it back, and they trigger in a new chain, so it's not like you're going to play into it if you know what you're doing. And on top of that, it's just not really needed. You can still play around it. It ultimately needs to be at 1, but with cards like Zealantis and things in the format, you have ways to push nonetheless. So that is it for the Marincess engine, a clean 20 cards, and then the best thing about this deck is you have another 20 flex spots to play with whatever you want. So starting off with the hand traps, this is going to look pretty straightforward, but we have triple Nibiru, triple Ash, and then triple Imperm. That is the ultimate holy trinity of hand traps. Not much really needs to be said about that. It is quite straightforward. These are your main game changers and deals with whatever's in the format and turning cash, sword soul, branded, whatever. These are your main heavy hitters. And then from there, my choice in consistency pieces, I am with 2 Desires. Yes, you can still run Desires in this deck. It is perfectly fine. I OTK'd a cash player today with 1 card left in deck. We were fine. But with that said, if you don't like this, you can cut it for other things. However, I typically side this out games 2 and 3 because ultimately you do want to go first with the deck, and there's nothing wrong with utilizing it. So again, 2 Desires is perfectly fine. And then in line with that, we also play 2 Thrust as well as 2 Talent. This is pretty straightforward. Thrust was absolutely nuts today. This card went in really hard. being able to search cards like Evenly that we do main deck, by the way, a little bit of a spoiler there, as well as searching this to either take a card, rip a card out of their hand. It's just really, really nuts. Being able to set wave if they've negated your Coral Triangle, different things like that is just really powerful. So 2 and 2 there. I would prioritize talents over thrust if you have to choose between one of them. And ultimately, if you don't want to afford and pay for thrust, you could just play 3 talents instead and get away with that. But 2 and 2 has worked really well for me. And then, of course, I've showcased this in a build in the past, a couple of my builds. We are still on triple evenly. This is perfectly fine. Your goal is never to end on the field spell turn 1 unless you feel like you absolutely have to. You're typically having Argonaut plus a Coral Anemone equipped with a wave in hand. They're going to dedicate so many resources just to get through that because your stuff is unaffected, and then you punish them with Evenly. Evenly is just an insane card. You can get it off thrust. The fact that you can just search that game 1 is insane. So 3 evenly, and then the last 2 board breakers here are 2 Book of Eclipse. Pretty straightforward. You are a link deck, which means this is like one of the best board breakers / defensive cards you can run right now since it affects your opponent and not you. And you can even do things like mid combo, you can Book of Eclipse almost all their board and then evenly stuff away so they don't get the draw. That came up for me today. But yeah, really, really incredible board breakers, a ton of flex spots. This deck just feels so free with the amount of stuff you can fit in and how hyper consistent it is. Still one of my favorite decks ever and goes really, really insane this format. So that's it for the main deck. For the extra deck, we'll talk about the links and work our way down. Starting off, 1 Bubble Reef. Ultimately, I think this should be bumped up to 2 if you have a second one. I think ultimately you can cut either I would say the Water Charmer or Crystal Heart, depending on your preference. You can cut one of these 2 for a second Bubble Reef. Ultimately, I'm leaning a bit more towards Crystal Heart just because this isn't coming up as much. And now with Contact C in the format, as well as Ibly and things like that, this seems a little bit more relevant right now. But if you don't like that, you can always cut something else. But Bubble Reef is really what pushes your plays through and lets you OTK and follow up if they hit something like Wave or they already cut you off of other things. Bubble Reef really is what makes your plays go through. So definitely I would recommend playing 2 of those in the future. I just didn't find any digging in my bulk, but 2 is definitely solid. After that, still 1 Argonaut. I don't think there's any reason not to play any more than 1. I think 1 is perfectly fine. This is honestly just like for a lot of inexperienced Kashtira players, this is bait. They almost always go for this when there's no reason they should. They should be going for Bubble Reef. They should be going for Zealantis. They should really be going for Coral Triangle, but they just don't. So this is bait. But overall, 1 is still perfectly fine. And then I've been on 2 Zealantis for a long time just because making 2 in the same line can come up. You can do that multiple times, not using the effect, but just making a second one if they shotgun negation or things like that, or making a second one and then using the pop effect in the battle phase to get around things like Imperm. But 2 is now, I think, mandatory just because of cash, because this is ultimately, if you weren't playing 2 of this is the card they're going to go for, is Zealantis, because this is your board wipe. This is your Zeus equivalent. So that's what they're going to go for there. And then moving on, we play 1 Triangle and 1 Marbled Rock. This is really what cash should go for. I don't think they're doing it, but it would hurt a lot if they did. So I'm not sure if this really should be bumped up to 2 yet, and I don't know what to cut, but ultimately still on 1 and 1. Not much to be said there. And then after that, we play the 2 Anemone, pretty straightforward. And then again, like I said before, 1 Splash, 1 Crystal Heart, and 1 Water Charmer. I think in a perfect world, again, I would cut this and put in a second Bubble Reef. If you're hyper concerned about keeping your stuff unaffected, side one of these, so that way if you run into like Labyrinth, Eldritch, Rogue, like Trap back row deck, you have some way of playing around those kinds of things. But otherwise, I think you can cut this for a second Bubble Reef moving forward. And then just the standard double Sea Angel and double Blue Slug. Not much to say about that. Again, depending on your fear of Kashtira and how you go about your lines, you could bump these up. You can bump different things up. So it's really up to you how you want to do that. From here, moving on to the side deck, this is going to be just going first / going second cards. I took a bit of a different approach to test a couple things today, and it worked out really, really well. Starting off, we play triple D Barrier. I don't think much really needs to be said about this card. This is just a mainstay staple in the side. For some people, it's a mainstay staple in the main right now with Thrust and things like that. Not much really to say there. And then our other 3 going second cards are double Gozen and 1 Appointer. I never see this card, and anytime I side this in, I don't see thrust either. So I'm honestly probably going to cut this where like a third goes in or just some other slot. It's insane when you open it, don't get me wrong, but I've never seen this card in my life siding it back unless it was at 3 back then. But since it's been hit to 1, I just never see this card. So you can cut this for something else if you really, really want. And then the going second cards, Triple Lancia. This card just, I wanted to change and do a little bit more of turn ender type sides. This slows down Kashtira a heck of a lot. This slows down Flu. This slows down Branded. It really makes the game a lot more manageable, and I think it's a really powerful card. And then 2 Contact C. I could not find my third, but I would highly recommend playing a third. I have a slot in here that I'll show you that I might cut one up for a third one. This card wins games by itself. Like every game I sided this in, it was insane. Shuts off Cash, shuts off Sword Soul, or at the very least forces Sword Soul to go into just a barren pass without any triggering of their monster effects to search or draw or anything like that. This card goes hard. This card is really, really good. Highly recommend playing this. Almost might consider maining this over Nib, since the like adventure is becoming a little more popular in Cash, and this can still help cook things like that. Without having to run into dealing with a dead Nib. But overall, it's really good. I don't think I would take out Nib, but this card is absolutely nuts. And then the third Book of Eclipse in the side. And then lastly, 3 Cosmic Cyclone. You could cut one of these for a third Contact C. But this was kind of a meta call just because around my area, you're getting a lot more people siding stuff like anti-spell or random floodgates and cards that don't let you interact by the time you get to your main phase 1. So I wanted something I could shotgun to stop that. And this is really come in handy for that kind of thing. Also, Labyrinth now being back on the map and a bit more popular, you want something to be able to deal with that, some type of respect for back row removal. You can do cards like Lightning Storm and things to thrust into, but ultimately, if they shotgun a card like Anti-Spell, which hurts this deck quite a lot, you want to be able to respond to that instantly and not have to force to be waiting a turn and pass. So that's where this comes in. So definitely a really good card. I think I would keep at least 2 in the side. So that's it for the main deck. That's it for the extra deck and the side deck. I hope you all like this. This deck is nuts. Still one of my most favorite decks ever that I've had the chance to play, and is absolutely nuts in this format. I will be on this deck for quite a long time. But yeah, with that said, thank you all so much for watching. Next episode of Meta Sheet pops up next week on Thursday, and I will see you all in the next one. Later.